Okay, so I think we're at 1:30. Welcome everybody to the Primary Care Commissioning Committee. I think we've got a number of apologies for absence, Sarah, haven't we? Do you want to just run us through who's apologised?
Yeah, I've just received full apologies from the LNC and James Reader, Mark Burgess is unable to come, Trista Dorsey, but Chris Turner's going to deputise. I think we've got James Granger attending for Stephen, of course. And I think that Sue Merton, that's the only other one that I'm aware of.
Great, thanks very much, Sarah, and welcome to colleagues who are substituting. So with your permission, I'll start. I think we've started recording the meeting. I hope everyone is okay with that. And hope that everyone's got sight of the papers for the meeting today. We're a meeting of two parts, part one in public, part two in private, and I think the times necessarily will need to be flexible between the two, depending on how we get through the business. So I hope that's clear to everybody in the public meeting here. And I think we'll I don't think we live stream on YouTube. I do think we put the meeting on YouTube, as far as I can remember from Sadie, you're nodding, thank you. So we're not live, as it were, in public, but we will be in public, so people need to bear that in mind in terms of the meeting today. We've got obviously the standing declarations of interest that people have made to the committee. Has anybody got any specific declarations that they want to make in this meeting in relation to the content of the meeting today? And you can do that by raising your hand. If not, I'll assume that that's covered. Thank you very much. So the next item, item 4 on the agenda, is just to review the minutes and the action log. So if I go through to the minutes first in terms of page by page for accuracy, and then we'll do any matters arising or updates from them, and then we'll sign them off, and then we'll go to the action log in that order, if that's all right. So this is page 2 of the pack. For the first of those, just our names. Next page, page 3, and this is just accuracy at the moment. And page 4, and page 5, page 6, page 7 on the finance, and that's it. So we're happy to agree those as a record of the meeting for signing. Thank you. And then in terms of the actions that are outstanding, we've got an action log there with just a couple of items on there. We've obviously done the minutes from last time. Sadie and Sarah, do you know whether we've completed 120? Citing Stephen on the financial risks, I imagine we have.
Yeah, Fiona's here, James. She can update on 120.
Beg your pardon, Fiona, go ahead.
That's all right. No, we haven't completed that. We're still waiting to hear back from the NNN about service supply and the financial costs to us. There was a bit of a delay in getting the discussions going. So we'll be following that up and trying to get some clarification on that. Great,
thanks, Fiona. Sorry for missing you there. And 122, it looks as if we've scheduled that for a forum in February 23, so I presume we don't need to cover that here. So with your permission, then we'll move back to the agenda for today. And I'm taking the forward planner as for noting. Is there anything you want to raise on that, Sadie or Sarah?
Only that the due to some unforeseen capacity issues due to sickness absence, we've had to bring a verbal update rather than the usual written update on SMI health check today. So apologies to members for that. But Shepherd will cover that later on the agenda verbally.
Great. Okay, thank you. Understood. Thanks, Sadie. So moving on then. So the item 6 is the risk register. This is for noting, but there are several potential discussion aspects of this. Sadie, do you want to take us into this, please?
Thank you. I hope members find the front sheet helpful. Which shows the tracker, and the ICB formed in July, which is why it starts on month 4 there. This month we're proposing to reduce the score on a couple of the risks. So you'll see there that PC9, hypnotics and anxiolytics, whilst we are still more of an outlier than we'd like to be, we're actually reducing, the trajectory is reducing faster than in other areas. So Michael and his team feel quite comfortable in being able to reduce the risk slightly on that particular area. As always, Michael will be able to go into more detail on that in his report. I'd also like to draw to your attention PC11, which is the interface risk. As you can see there, we're proposing quite a significant reduction in risk, which would bring it to the tolerated score, and therefore we're proposing to close that risk. Kate Lewis, who has now recently left the team, had done quite a significant amount of work on the infrastructure around this particular risk. We've got very clear leadership now under the medical director. We've got an infrastructure of regular meetings. We've got methods for practices to report in difficulties that they're experiencing with uncontracted workload transfer. So I think we feel reasonably comfortable in being able to manage this risk through business as usual. We're not saying it's disappeared. It's still work that is ongoing. However, I think the infrastructure is now in place, which it wasn't before when we first brought this to the committee. As per the forward plan, we'll still be bringing a full report on a regular basis to the committee, so the committee can monitor progress of the work that we're doing. I'll just pause there. I'd also like to highlight PC14, but I'll just pause there in case there are any comments or questions on PC11.
Thank you. Thanks, Sadie. Very clear. Hein.
Yeah, I had a question on PC11. So on one hand, it's good to see that actions have been taken and the risk, the mitigated risk is lower. But I recall when it was created, it was quite a difficult issue where it took a long time to get traction between primary and secondary care. So it's, I guess, repeating the ask, are we comfortable enough that leadership, as you say, is in good nick now? If indeed this is the mitigated risk score, then I agree we should remove it from the risk register. But it's, I recall the starting problems we had, so I just want to seek further confirmation, Sadie. Thanks.
Yes, Hein, you're absolutely right. It did take quite a lot of work to get this off the ground. And I think what we now have is a monthly interface group meeting, which is really well attended by providers, by the local medical committee and by the ICB. It's chaired by Frankie Swords as the medical director. We've been having separate meetings with the local medical committee about the contractual requirements on secondary care providers. All secondary care providers, with the exception of NSFT, met the deadline of the 30th of September for undertaking a self-assessment against the contractual requirements. We are now working with all of the providers to develop their action plans in response to those self-assessments, and we're working in conjunction with the LMC on that. We've got a follow-up meeting with the LMC in a couple of weeks to go through the progress that we've made to date. So I think, oh, and we've got the full support of the contracting and procurement team that are managing this through the contracting meetings that they're having with providers as well. So I think whilst it was a very juddery start, and undoubtedly from a practice point of view, they'll be feeling that this is not resolved yet. They're still experiencing a lot of issues with workload transfer. In terms of the infrastructure for managing the risk, that is now in place, and I think what we need to then monitor through our regular reports to the committee is the impact of what we're doing. So that would be my proposal to
Okay,
you,
no,
so that
that's-
you are still cited.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thanks.
Thanks, Sadie. Thanks, Hein. Any other comments on that? Otherwise, I think we will take your recommendation then, Sadie, which is to close that risk, but have an option to, as it were, monitor the issues as we go forwards.
And of course, we can bring it back if we feel the score, because this will sit on our departmental workload, and if we feel that it's you know, we're starting to lose confidence in it, then we would not hesitate to bring it back to your attention through the regular reports.
Thanks, Sadie. All right.
Okay,
Well,
shall I quickly update as well on PC 14, which is the risk that also sits on the board assurance framework, and this is on the resilience of general practice. This remains a red risk. We're still very concerned about the resilience of general practice overall, and obviously we do have a small number of practices who are particularly struggling at the moment. Since we met last time, we're now very well aware that there is no additional winter funding for general practice, unlike we had last year. And so we are investigating whether there is any slippage within our budgets that we can recycle, if you like, to invest into resilience funding, albeit that we will be consulting the LMC on that before we kind of confirm any activity. We do now have the final forecasts for the primary care network additional roles reimbursement schemes, so the team is working through how to proceed with enabling primary care networks to bid against any underspend and that funding, and there will be a process for that. And unfortunately, we have seen a further partnership rated as inadequate across their two practice contracts, which is later on the agenda. So that is obviously causing concern. And since the date of this, we've seen a national proposal by at the LMC's conference about recommending that all practices should declare themselves as requires improvement because of the pressures that they're experiencing through workforce constraints and increasing workload. So it is very much still a real issue for us. We are proposing a number of potential areas to explore to our executive management team when they meet next week, and hope to be able to update you on those and what's been agreed for further focus at the next committee meeting.
Thanks, Sadie. Hilary? You're still muted, Hilary. You're struggling with your...
Yeah.
Oh, we can hear you now, Hilary.
Can you?
Yeah.
No, sorry, we've got really big problems with IT. I don't know what's going on with my computer. No, it's okay. I was going to comment on previous issue, but no, it's fine. Just ignore for now.
Okay, thank you. Sadie, so I think the committee notes our ongoing concern about that risk, and that is the proposal to come back to committee with some further actions in relation to trying to mitigate the risk then? And do we need to make the board aware of the ICB? I mean, how much of an escalation do we feel this needs to be at the system-wide level?
So this sits on the board assurance framework, and we provide an update to each of the board meetings on this. I think one of the recommendations to the ICB executive management team is that there should be discussion about primary care resilience at the ICS executive management team, so the chief execs meeting. And I think, you know, with our new priority of strengthening primary care as a system, that seems entirely appropriate, James.
Okay, thank you. And in relation to funding for the winter, I guess we are going to get as a system, aren't we, the 500 million, which is aimed at discharge. So whether there's an opportunity is there for primary care consideration in that context. We don't know what the rules of that funding are, do we? But we know it's coming imminently, and it will be in, I think we know it's paid in two parts, and the health part of it will be up for grabs, as it were. So I suppose I'm keen for primary care to be included in those discussions, if that's possible.
Yes, and obviously Mark Burgess is the lead director for both the urgent and emergency care work and primary care. So I think you're absolutely right. We're very keen to be involved in those discussions as well. And I know that there's a big focus on beds and bed equivalents in for that funding. So it will be for us to make sure that we can kind of provide assurance on that as part of supporting general practice.
Great. Okay. Well, let's sort of note that as a committee then, and note the priority of primary care in relation to winter funding and winter discharge then. Any other comments on this risk? Otherwise, is there any more on this report then, Sadie?
I've nothing further to update on if there are no queries.
No, it doesn't look like there are, so we'll move on then with people's. Thank you, Sadie. So our next item in the service development area of the meeting is the learning disability health checks. And again, I think we have a report, Shepherd, on this, do we? It's over to yourself, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, James. So just to apologize for the delays in the data for September and October period, but I think notwithstanding the numbers that we have at the end of August, I think we've got enough to work with and also to highlight to committee members. I will also give you some kind of heads up on the September, October, because I've seen unvalidated data, but it's all positive, it's all good. I think there are kind of three parts to this report for me that I just want to highlight to members. The first part is our positioning within the regional performance within the East of England. So you've got the bar charts there that shows how we have performed up to end of August in 22 in comparison as well to last year. So that gives you quite a lot of data to make sense of how we are doing. It goes without saying that we continue to lead in the region in terms of the number of annual health checks that we have completed, and it will be visible in the September October data as it comes through. It has been acknowledged in the region that we have seen an improvement across all the systems in the region in terms of the uptake of annual health checks. Compared to last year, this year we've done 2,125 additional checks. And you would also notice that Norfolk and Waveney has done 717 of those, which means that we've done approximately over 30% of the improvement across the 6 systems, which is really a strong performance that needs to be acknowledged. And it's also worthwhile to note that the register size is also increasing across all the six systems, and which is a positive change that also needs to be observed, in the sense that we are identifying more people in our communities. So lots of work going on to do that. But in terms of, as we do more work, we also notice areas that we need to improve. So we have got strong data, and it shows that some areas are doing so well than others. And I've noted that despite the great improvements we've done in our system, approximately half of our practices have delivered less than 60% of their annual health checks, with some yet to deliver the first check this year. And I've looked at the data, and most of the practice that are yet to deliver is to do with the practice that have got at least less than 8 or 10 patients in their system. So they tend to carry out those checks at the end of the year, and it does not present any material risk in terms of our delivery for this year. We are absolutely on track to deliver our commitment for this year and possibly for the following years. So that is for the regional position. Just to also bring your attention to where our local system, clearly at the end of August, which I reported last month, we were 25%, and I'm really pleased to say our September data shows that we are now at approximately 33%, and that would show in the next report once the data has been processed. And clearly, I think we are moving from strength to strength in this piece of work. I've made some comments around some next steps in terms of strengthening and continuously strengthening our position in this piece of work. So we're really keen to learn from others. So we have arranged a meeting with colleagues from South and Mid Essex to discuss and share some learning in terms of how they have delivered this. If you look at the bar chart, you can actually see that South and Mid Essex, whilst they have not improved as we have done, but they've been consistent last year and this year. So there's something there that they are doing that they've maintained that we may learn from. So I'm really looking forward to that meeting. And we've also reached out to Suffolk colleagues around how to review the quality of work that we do. They're doing some really interesting pieces of work using peer reviewers, so people with learning disabilities collaborating, working closely with practices to review the quality of annual health checks. So I'm really curious about how that works. So we have reached out on that. I also wanted to highlight our review of risk in terms of delivery for Q3 and Q4, mainly because the additional resources that we have used is coming to an end, and we are continuously monitoring to see the impact of that, and we'll be able to report in the following next month once we've done the full assessment of that. But there are really positive pieces of work around sustainability that are taking place, and we'll be able to feed back on that the following month. Obviously, the data is moving through the system, which is really good. It's helping to have really good conversations in our system. Then I'm also really keen around working much closer with our voluntary sector colleagues and third sector colleagues to really reach out to those communities and families that we cannot just reach as health alone. So working with Open Doors and other organizations. So we'll be able to talk more once we have made some strides in that area. I will stop there and pause for a second for colleagues to respond or add any other.
Thank you, Shepard. Any comments or questions from colleagues? It's good progress. Bill.
Yes, thank you very much, Shepard. Really good news. I'm slightly concerned about we can keep up the momentum when we lose the specific extra funding going forwards. But I just wondered, is there any, given the success of this project, is there any learning that we could use to apply this methodology and this cohort elsewhere in other other priorities of primary care? Because it would, it's the idea of it's done and then shut down and we do something else. I just wonder if there's anything else that we could fold in or use this as a model to support elsewhere, because it's been such a success.
Absolutely. I think it's fair to say we've taken a lot of learning in this. And immediately we are applying this to SMI. And we have brought together meetings that includes LD and SMI, and there's a lot of learning that we are pulling from that. And I think some of the key immediate learnings that we are seeing is that it connects to what Sadie described in terms of practice resilience. It's so obvious that our practices are under significant amount of pressure, with workforce issues, with just that consistency in the workforce too. And it's no brainer, I think, for me, that there's so much that our practice can do, but there is that additionality that as systems, we need to support practice to deliver the best that they can. So that simple learning that comes from this, it's very clear that we need to engage more and more with communities, and we need to be able to demonstrate that engagement with communities and local systems to actually get the real meaning of the work that we do. So there are basic things that we should continue to learn to actually deliver meaningful transformational change to this piece of work. And I think it's fair to say the successes that we have done with this population shows that there is more for us to learn. The more we improve, the more we learn to improve the situation. And maintaining that means investing. And we need to test our plans around the inequalities, whether actually what our ambitions we are setting, are we also supporting with the resources that are needed to deliver that? So those are some of the learnings that I am observing, but definitely we'll be pulling together some learning paper that actually we can share with other parts of our primary care work streams.
Well, I'd be very interested in that, coming back here, specifically that issue around resources, because if it is going to be driving a change in behaviour and working more closely with local communities, as you advise, and also supporting practices, then let's not lose this. And I would be very interested in seeing a further paper come to here, maybe with some sort of financial proposal attached, so that we can continue, especially as you talked about inequalities, to drive that, because I think it is going to be a priority of the whole system. So it would be nice to see us doing something concrete here with that.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks, Shepard. Any other questions on that? Otherwise, we'll move on then. So the next item, Shepard, is a verbal update, isn't it, on the severe mental illness health checks?
Thank you. I will give a brief update on the SMI annual health check. Okay, so I'll probably start by just giving you a bit of background in terms of numbers around this. So we have almost 9,500 people with serious mental illness on our SMI register. And we have agreed a delivery trajectory with NHS England. And we are making steady progress on delivering on that trajectory, and we've got quarterly targets that set for us that we are performing against. So in terms of the expectation by the end of the year, this year, we should have completed just under 5,000. I think to be exact, it's 4,748 checks that we should complete by then. We have completed so far just under 4,000, that's 924 that we've completed so far. So you can see that we are on track to be able to deliver our year-end trajectory. So we are in the right direction, and we need to work on and strengthen and secure the uptake rates that we are delivering on this. But there's something I think I just need to highlight to the committee is the way I think it goes to Bill's point around learning on this. So the algorithm for SMI monitoring is not the same as LD. So the SMI trajectory is based on a 3-year cycle, and it's a stretching cycle. So it's over a 3-year cycle. So for this year, we are supposed to deliver just under 5,000, and it's a cumulative figure from 2021 up to 2023. So over a 3-year period. So it's different. It's not quite the same, and that's a national target. Against those that approach, we are doing well. We've met our Q1 trajectory. We met last year's trajectory. Q2, we just missed it by less 24 checks, but we are on track to deliver on that at the end of the year. But I suppose the challenge we've always posed in our system is that right approach in terms of other people won't be seen in the next 3 years. And what does it mean? There are some discussions in the background with NHS England around learning from how learning disability is done. So I would not be surprised if we see some changes in our approach. But in terms of reporting against the national approach, we are on track. There is no risk of delivery against those targets. If that is okay, I'll stop there unless if colleagues have got any questions.
Thanks, Shepard. It's really helpful to know the different context there for mental health rather than learning disability and autism. Any questions about that, colleagues? So we're on, essentially, Shepard, we're on track, as it were, for our annual achievement of that. Yeah. Any comments or questions? No. Okay, great. Thanks very much, committee. We'll move on then. The next item, sorry, I've lost my agenda. Go back to my screen. The next item is the quarterly digital report. I think we do have a report on this, don't we, on page 34 of our pack. And do we have, I've got PW by the agenda, but Anne's name on the report.
Pete Ward's just arrived, James.
Oh, good. Hello, Pete. You're very welcome.
Thank you, James.
Very timely.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll take the report as read and just highlight a few areas. In terms of winter pressures, I would add that digital work has been ongoing to make sure that there is an offer out there that practices can access in terms of a directory. There will be a focus again this year on the Teams calling offer, as well as the fact we've ordered additional laptops to cope with any requests that are coming for practices to need to be able to access them. One other highlight that I would mention is in reference to clinical systems. We have had 3 practices that have successfully moved from EMIS to System 1. There is another practice in the pipeline. And I would flag that in particular is a positive in terms of having a common system across the PCN, making it easier in terms of shared admin and also for the R staff roles in terms of appointment management and communications. And obviously it's easier for a staff experience so that they're not having to know and update across multiple systems. I want to highlight a bit of an update around practice telephony, just to sort of say from a really positive start, this is around the cloud telephony project. Unfortunately, there have been some issues with that. You know, the report details this. That was from old machines that were in practices needed to be updated. There was issues around network availability and the quality of bandwidth that was on those networks. Those were solved. You know, we got new PCs in and we fixed connectivity issues through additional lines in. However, there was then a problem with a soft phone solution as part of the project that that actually had a coding error. This was escalated with the supplier, and a solution is put in place that we are testing. So what that means is there was a slight pause in the rollout program, and we are confident that by mid-November, if we've got no further issues, we can restart that and recommence that. The digitisation of Lloyd George Notes project has commenced. That's covering 14 EMIS practices and 27 System 1 practices that the practices are fully involved in, and there's a whole support offer that wraps around that project for the practices. And the other thing I wanted to flag up that's coming is around what's called the SD-WAN. And what that basically means is a software-defined wider network. What does that mean? Which will be coming over towards the end, into the end of next year. But it will give better resilience to practices and a better Wi-Fi connection, and is part of our cloud first strategy. There are 14 practices involved in that pilot, and we are undertaking surveys at those sites to look at making that available. Like I say, hopefully we're going to be going live with a pilot fairly soon to then look at the more wider rollout across primary care. I would flag that there have been some ongoing cyber incidents. These are mainly through NHS Mail. They have not just hit primary care, they've also been impacted in the ICB. There are a couple of things coming in terms of NHS Mail has introduced a tool that will be scanning all attachments, which will help detect some of those phishing links that are embedded within documents. And alongside that, we have been running a cyber awareness campaign through Cyber Awareness Month of October. And watch this space for how we're going to develop a support package for primary care to take account of multi-factor authentication and the security aspects that brings. Just to wrap things up, I would just say that our continued direction of travel is we will be working on the Wi-Fi rollout, cloud, and the cloud strategy in terms of making sure that infrastructure is in place for primary care and the PCNs. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. That's really comprehensive, and there's clearly lots going on in this space, but judging by the paper. Sorry, Peter, carry on.
I was going to say yes. In particular, James, just one highlight I did forget to reference was around the remote monitoring. So we've seen that in the care home setting where we've seen like over 1,000 observations, where we're doing that, across 19 homes. There's been really positive feedback from practices that were involved in that, but that's having a positive impact.
Great. Yeah, it's good for them, good for primary care, I should think. Okay, any comments or questions, colleagues, in terms of how that's being experienced out there in primary care land? Hilary.
Hi, thanks. So we're one of those practices that moved from EMIS to System 1. I have to say it's been a massive undertaking. And although there was some support. I don't think it was quite as what we might have thought we needed. We had all sorts of issues. I think it's settling down now, but the additional time, cost, staff working weekends, etc., it's not something to be underestimated, I would say.
Yeah, thanks, Hilary. Peter, how many how many practices are left on? What's the proportion of System 1 now?
So we're left with 14 EMIS practices.
With plans for people to, I don't know what the rules are actually. I'm conscious that I need to not step on a mine here, but what are the expectations, as it were?
It's a choice. It's completely choice based.
Okay. Right. Okay. But we're clear in our report of the benefits, I suppose, of using a similar system across.
Yes.
System.
Very much so, because they work quite differently, both in terms of interaction for staff, but also from a data point of view, and then how we want to extract and use data. They work quite differently as well. So convergence is very much welcome in terms of having consistency of approach and consistency of experience for staff.
Thank you. Bill. You're muted, Bill, still.
It's the first time today, sorry about that. Is there anything that these 14 practices have in common in terms of performance? And I mean, okay, it's a choice, but if all the other practices have moved across and 14 practices haven't, are they in the process of transitioning, or have they made a decision not to transition?
So there are ongoing conversations, but it's not something that, you know, the ICB can enforce upon practices.
No, I understand that. That's not what I was asking. I was asking, you know, are they just on a journey, or have they made a conscious decision, which is entirely within their right, not to transition?
I think that's a blended approach, Bill. I think it's a combination of the two, that some sites will be very much wedded to it for historical reasons. Others have seen or experienced, in particular, the best way of describing this, EMIS in particular has been problematic, was problematic from a consistency point of view during the pandemic because of how they were structured for running reporting, and when they were running reports through COVID at national level, it did create performance issues, in particular with the EMIS system, and I think that might have been pivotal in some practices deciding to make those changes.
Thanks.
Okay, so the ones who have decided not to do it, are there any commonality that they have in terms of their ongoing assessment for performance, or have we got issues elsewhere in prescribing and things? I mean, are there a common cohort that share, or is this a completely random selection? I'm just trying to get to the let's take the information from this one project and look at it across all of the identifiers that we have, because and do they have something in common that we would need to support them in another way with other things as well, or is that not the case?
No, that's not the case.
Okay, well, it's good to know. That's why I asked the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Peter. Any other comments or questions on the report? Otherwise, Peter, you're asking us to note progress, I think, aren't you, in terms of the committee?
Please.
So we duly noted the progress and the encouragement from us in furthering this agenda for our system. Great. Okay, thank you very much. That takes us on then to the estates report. Thank you, Peter. Sadie, can you remind me who's covering this?
You've got Paul and Kath here.
Great. Okay. Paul or Kath, would you like
Thanks.
to take?
Yeah, thanks, James. I'll assume that the paper's read. There have been a few updates since the paper was written, so I'll kind of highlight some of those as we go through. So, firstly, to note for the Way 4B programme, we had some good news at the end of September that our programme business case was approved by the Department of Health and Social Care, which was excellent news. And since then, we've been working with NHS Property Services and existing landlords of premises at Thetford and Sprowston to develop a short form business case ready for submission by kind of June next year for the new build schemes, which is good. We've got a preferred contractor to deliver the 2 new build premises at Rackheath and Kings Lynn. They haven't formally been appointed yet. Contracts haven't been signed, but we're talking probably a week or 2 away before that's before we can actually name them. But that's progressing well. There are some programme does remain tight for the new build, so we're still forecasting that the premises will be completed by March 2024 and operational by May 2024, but that is tight. NHS England have been very supportive in terms of providing us with helpful assurance of the programme that we've been provided with by the preferred contractor, and overlaying that with the expected approval process for the business case. So it is a risk, but it's one that feels manageable at this point. And last week, ICB executive received a paper looking at the ownership model for the Rackheath and the Kings Lynn sites, and it was supported by the executive that the ICB looks to take ownership of those 2 assets. It will be cheaper for us on a revenue basis to own those assets rather than it being an NHS Property Services or another NHS trust, due to the PDC requirements are not applicable to ICBs and they are to other NHS organisations. So we don't need to make a 3.5% return on the building when other NHS organisations would be required to. So they've committed that as a principle that, yes, we want to do that. We need to work through the consequences of that, which will then form part of the final business case submission. The next section of the paper, we talk about the policy developments in the state strategy piece. We've got a launch event happening tomorrow lunchtime. Will be led by myself, but then most of the agenda will be run by Community Health Partnerships and HIP and Norlife, who will be delivering the clinical and estate strategies. We've had good acceptance so far. We've had about 60 responses confirming that they'll be attending, which is good news. The session will be recorded anyway, so that can be shared out to all those who are unable to make it. Also note in the paper that we're still waiting confirmation of our BAU capital allocation for this year. I'm pleased to say that I've now had confirmation of that since writing this paper. So I've got a allocation of £700,000, rounding here, £700,000 for this financial year and £1.2 million for next year, out of the total allocation of roughly £2 million per year from our primary care BAU pot. So the balance being attributable to GPIT. So the schemes where we've got capital allocated to this year is Toffwood Medical Centre, Blowfield, Drayton, Long Stratton and St James. We need to do a bit of work around profiling and who can spend that money this year and who tips into next year. But we shouldn't have any problems in spending that money, which is good news. And I think that's all I wanted to highlight from the report, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Really clear. Any questions, colleagues, or observations around that progress, Hilary?
Thanks. I guess my only comment would be, obviously we've met with Paul separately in Attleborough, because Attleborough is a massive problem in terms of estates. I'm not sure that really comes across in the paper, but it is. Obviously we've got 4,000 houses coming and we're out of space already and have been for quite a long time. So just don't want the board to kind of lose sight really of that is a really big issue that isn't yet resolved, but we are working with Paul to try to come to a resolution somehow.
Yeah, previously the committee did ask for an update on Attleborough, which I'd been unable to provide, so we hadn't had those conversations, we hadn't met yet, but we did last week. I went over to the practice and met with Hilary and the rest of the partners there, so we think we've got the beginnings of a plan there. And I've got a meeting with Brecklin Council tomorrow to discuss an element of that, so we will be able. I'm in a position now where I can bring something back to the committee to give an update.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, and thanks for the reminder, Hilary. Actually, we did decide to do that, didn't we? To keep monitoring that. So we'll do that in that way then. Thanks, Paul. Any other comments? Otherwise, Paul, I think this is an update to the committee, isn't it? No decision for us today. Great. Okay. So thanks. Oh, sorry, Sadie.
Thank you. Couldn't get my hand up quick enough. I'm quite conscious that as well as Attleborough, there are other some other areas where we are experiencing some estate pressures, and I was just wondering whether in the next estates update it might be helpful to where we are able to, because it's not commercially confidential, we're able to give any information on some of those pipeline issues that aren't necessarily sort of formally in the process yet.
Yeah, we can give an update, Sadie. I'll probably speak to you in month around how we do that, because a pipeline of schemes is very large and would be over a decade's, well, more than a decade's worth of capital allocation there. So we'll just need to think about how we do that. And the PCN kind of estates work, which is now kicking off, will help reshape some of that as well. So happy to do something. I think we just need to get our heads together to work out what it is exactly that we bring that would be best for the committee to see.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sadie. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, that would be great if you could work that out with Sadie. And we'll schedule that under Sadie's advice going forwards, as it were. Great. Okay, good. Shall we move on then, colleagues, to routine care for diabetes?
Hello.
Hello. Yep.
Hello.
Claire. Welcome, Claire.
Hi. I'll take the paper as read. We just by way of background, so I do have some slides and data I can share with you if you would like me to, but it may not. I don't know whether you want to see that. So I am, just by way of conflicts of interest, the clinical lead for the National Diabetes Audit Primary Care Core data. So we've got some recent data hot off the press for that. I was going to load the slides into the chat, but I don't have a facility to do that. Just by way of summary, I'm looking at that data, which is now reported to the end of March 2020, so the last financial year. There is evidence of some recovery, which is very pleasing, but obviously, as I'm sure you all appreciate, the system remains very challenged. One of the reasons why diabetes is such a hot topic with NHS England is because of the impact both to people with diabetes, but also the cost to the system. Prior to the arrival of COVID, it was the single most expensive condition to the NHS, accounting for 10% of the NHS budget annually, approximately 80% of which is spent on the management of people with long-term complications arising from living with diabetes for a long time. So it's absolutely essential that we get diabetes up and running. In terms of the impact of the pandemic on care processes and diabetes, at the height of the first wave of the pandemic, there was just over a 75%, I think it was 76% drop off in accessibility to care for people with diabetes, and that was reflected in all care processes. A really interesting metric that has evolved or become apparent as a consequence to a lot of the work that was undertaken during the pandemic is it is now clearly established that missing care processes in people with diabetes is a marker of health inequality that is associated with premature mortality and other adverse outcomes. We don't fully understand the reasons behind that, but that has become, you know, I think beyond all doubt, an apparent association. So ensuring that we're able to stand up services and offer routine care to people is really important. And what you've got in front of you is very much a brief summary. Bear in mind this is only one of our programs of work, and all of these are active programs now that you've got this list here. A few things that I'll just highlight that are perhaps not captured here. One is in diabetes prevention, another hugely important area for the NHS across England, but also for our system. We've undertaken several training sessions with our local colleagues. We've had attendance in total, I think, of over 300 people. We've conducted a system-wide audit of which 89 practices took part, and we've identified a lot of people on practice systems that were missing from registers for people at risk of diabetes. So we've done a lot of work there. We are challenged with our providers in diabetes prevention currently, but we're doing a lot of work with them in order to try and get that service back functioning again in the way it needs to support our local population. Lots of things that we've mentioned on the paper. By way of detail, I think embedding diabetes metrics in the LCS is definitely a way to go forward. Currently, we have certain mismatches between the GMS QOF contract for diabetes, what's measured in the diabetes national audit, and outcomes that we need as a system. So hence the importance of ensuring that that is embedded in the LCS to make sure we're supporting teams to deliver on those elements that are missing from the QOF and or GMS contracts. Just looking at some of the things that are in hand, I'm cited on data for almost all the practices from across the system, not all. We definitely have quite marked variance in performance at the moment, practices who seem to be recovering really quite well, others who seem to be struggling. And of course, the challenges are those that you will be familiar with, staffing, workforce, estates come into it too, training, and just the pressures of pandemic recovery in general and the demand that we're all seeing out in general practice at the moment. But we have got a number of ideas to help and support that, and we've already engaged in a number, I think actually with all localities in terms of where we might go to support them, and a lot that's going on, which is summarised for you. Things that I see as big ways forward, we have some funding to support a quality improvement collaborative, and as I say, we're already engaged with a number of localities around how we might support those practices. A lot of that will be around training, sharing best practice. There may be some benefit into supporting with access to additional workforce, people who can help support standing up of services. I won't go through everything that's on the paper. Suffice it to say that in addition to that, there are lots of other challenges. The other challenge, Michael's on the call, that we've had endless impromptu communications about over the last few weeks, is we have a global supply shortage on a whole number of medications that we use to support people with diabetes, and we have some local supply chain issues around insulin, which, if you need insulin, is a life-requiring treatment in many cases. So there are multiple challenges. I don't think we've got all the answers or all the solutions. There's a long way to go yet to get diabetes services up and running the way that they need to. We kind of need to overshoot a little bit as well. Data from the National Diabetes Audit suggests that traditionally as a system, we've been very good at doing care processes, and we want to try and recover that to where we were before the pandemic and more. But we were underachieving on achievement of treatment targets. So we already had a bit of work to do, a bit of catch up there. So that will be a tall ask for our colleagues in primary care over coming months. So absolutely essential that we have a programme of work aligned to support our colleagues out in primary care. And with that in mind, particular ideas for the training hub, and also for our CAR-AME leads, which will look at more than just diabetes. Actually, that will be across cardiometabolic medicine, so including cardiovascular, weight management, all sorts of other elements, in order to do that, and I shall stop talking, see if anyone's got any questions.
Thank you, Claire. Excellent, and an excellent report. I had a question in my mind, but I'll bring in Hind first. Hind.
Hi, Claire. Thanks for the update. I had, from what you said, I had a question, I guess for Sadie, because you said, Claire, you see quite a variation between take-up of processes across practices. And my question to Sadie is, are we using that insight? Because it may tell us some practices may be struggling and the traffic light on other scores might turn more red. So whether that triangulation was happening, Sadie.
I think this is all wrapped up into the development of our BI and population health approach. So it isn't actively happening at the moment. I would be really interested to look at that, because I think there's probably two things. One is probably linked to deprivation and the additional challenge in encouraging people to attend, but that's just my thinking without seeing the data. And the other is, as you mentioned, around particular resilience issues where we know that practices are struggling more generally, let alone in the area of diabetes. But yeah. I think you're right, and we're very keen to get that dashboard developed.
So I can just give a bit of insight from my knowledge of the National Diabetes Audit. So what we see within the audit is there is, the sigmoid curve is quite significant. And certainly in the year prior to the pandemic, we had about a 20-fold variation across the patch in terms of achievement of care processes and about a 3-fold variation in attainment of treatment targets. And you'll see that picture wherever you go, whichever part of the country you look at, you'll see the same picture. It's not all related to deprivation, and that's a really important point to hold on to. There are some very good practices who work in areas of high deprivation. A lot of this is about process and organisation. So, for example, it may well be that we have discrepancies between the requirements within contracted elements of what GPs are required to do for QOF and things like that in terms of delivering diabetes care and what the National Diabetes Audit measures, and hence the LCS to plug those gaps. So there may be, for some practices, very simple things, like they're just not aware of those two different metrics, and all we need to do is let them know that. And as soon as they know that, they'll be able to reorganise, and they will very quickly make up the difference and actually turn their metrics rapidly from red to amber to green. There will be others who are challenged through much more complex reasons, some of which may be linked to deprivation, but also I think challenges such as workforce and estates. We are hearing from teams as being important elements. What we've got at the moment is we've got a questionnaire that has gone out to practices. This is based on a survey that we undertook with the Primary Care Diabetes Society. We know from the respondents from that survey that 87% of practices reported that they are moderately, severely or very severely impacted by the pandemic in their ability to offer diabetes care. I would expect to see a very similar picture reported across the patch. And some of what we've asked about as well is models of care. So it does look as though we have emerging differences between practices, some of which is accountable for by the different models of care. And that's a little bit, again, to do with a degree of organisation within practice and how you deliver the service, but also around workforce and the skill mix that you might have. But these may be some of the challenges that as a system we can look at, working with Training Hub, working with our reservist teams and that type of thing, in order to see if we can actually put in a bit of support that would more rapidly help us recover those diabetes services for people with diabetes. There is a consensus amongst specialists in diabetes that the indirect consequences of the pandemic on patient care will be greater ultimately than the consequences of the pandemic, and that's a huge concern because many of you will know that the risks of mortality in COVID-19 are about 2 to 3-fold higher in people with diabetes. So, they are undoubtedly a group who are going to be impacted massively during and in the aftermath of the pandemic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Sobering thoughts. Bill.
Yes, I'm just taking Hind's point and going, we're a commissioning committee. Given these sorts of interventions are about stopping the deterioration, when we already know about the person's condition. So this isn't about diagnosis. This is, is this, in following on from Shepherd's piece earlier on, is this piece a part of a bigger piece around the support? Because it seems to be the same issues and pressures that are causing the issues in all of these individual separate strands of work. Is there something that we as the committee ought to be thinking larger around? Okay, this is across several different types of problems, but it is, the cause. This isn't about diagnosis, it's about ongoing management of people who we know are vulnerable and don't come forward. And that we, is this something that we should consider in more detail?
I think I'm sure other people want to contribute to that. There will be a missing cohort who have not been diagnosed, who would otherwise have been diagnosed over the last 2.5 years. So that's one concern, is that we may well see people ultimately who present whose condition is further developed at the point of presentation compared to what would have been before the pandemic. So actually there is a piece of work, and as you know, public health and GP practices and various other sources are doing a lot on NHS health checks in order to try and pick those people up. But it's estimated, so in the first 9 months of the pandemic, it was estimated that about 60,000 people will have been missed in terms of a new diagnosis of type 2 diabetes across England. So a proportion of that obviously will sit with Norfolk and Waveney. So there is a bit of catch up in terms of diagnosis, almost certainly. But yeah, that recovery piece is huge. And one of the things we're discovering as well, and I'm sure the other clinicians on the call will recognise this, is that a lot of it is that conditions that were well managed are maybe not quite so well managed now. We're seeing a lot of people, and certainly the data from the NDA to March suggests that particularly in type 2 diabetes, there are more people with slightly higher HbA1cs, there are more people with slightly higher blood pressure, and all that just needs even more work at ground level in order to work with people to turn that round.
Yeah, and thank you, Claire. I mean, on the issue of the health checks, public health, which is another hat I wear, we have put in massively increased resources into the supporting the health checks, and also brought in another provider to help support the checks being carried out. So we haven't taken any money away from primary care, but we've also added another provider to work alongside to support the delivery of health checks. So I absolutely take that piece on board. But how would we get something, James, come back to here on the wider piece?
Well, I'll take advice from Claire, but I guess what you're essentially saying, Claire, and I think Sadie made the point earlier, and Shepherd to some degree, there are some areas of resilience for primary care that, as it were, have disproportionate impacts than others. And while we're trying to address the resilience more generally, there are areas like this. I suppose blood pressure is another. There are probably other critical areas where if we don't do something collectively, then potentially we'll have an impact, bigger impact down the line for the cost of care, but also the outcomes for people. Whereas some aspects of resilience are inconvenient, but won't have the same impact, I suppose. So I think it's about bringing something back on resilience, probably, Bill. It's that earlier question that Sadie raised about that.
Sorry, it's for the committee to decide. It was on mute again, but yes, I absolutely agree with you, Jen.
Claire, I was going to ask a question about public messaging. It partly relates to the point that Bill has made around public health and the patient messaging that we give to people. I've seen lots actually on blood pressure and knowing your numbers, quite a few. But in this area, it seems to be, perhaps because it's more complex in a way, but I haven't seen that we've done much. And should there be an expectation that we do that work in the system? And what would that mean for primary care if we did?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is work going on. I mean, one of the good things, we've had a completely new team in the last 3 or 4 months, actually, and I'm really delighted that two of the diabetes team are actually appointed across diabetes and cardiovascular medicine. So that's actually really good. We're starting to actually connect with colleagues who are working on those elements and actually joining those elements up. I've just come from a diabetes programme board where we had really good representation across the system. Our acute providers all represented, our community trust represented, Active Norfolk represented, the LPC represented. So we're well connected. And I think the challenge from the pandemic is just that it just takes time to reconnect things and get everything up and running. And we're trying to do all that whilst everybody is working under extraordinary, and dare I say it, unprecedented pressures which continue. So I think there's just a huge challenge. But I think we've got some innovative ideas. My only slight concern is around the recovery work. I'm very keen to support practices through a supportive quality improvement collaborative. The challenge there is not all teams will feel that they've got the time to be involved in that, but I do think there are a number of relatively simple things that could be done in many surgeries that would make a tangible difference relatively quickly. But it's whether teams feel that they've got the reserves to actually contribute to doing that now, which I think could prove to be a challenge. But I think you're right, that sort of joining things up and actually thinking bigger. My only concern about going out with a huge public message is, again, it potentially adds pressure. So it might actually impact on us being able to solve some of the problems if we add the pressure. I think we need to build a bit of framework underneath before we can comfortably do that, knowing that it's going to help. Definitely a plan for down the line, but is it right for right now? Do we need to get things up and running and a bit more, let teams feel that they're back on their feet really before we can do some of that work?
Sure. Thank you, Claire. Is this due back at the committee then, Claire? Is it periodic updating that comes in?
I think it would be really useful to come. It's very helpful to kind of share things and hear from you, and just to have that feedback in terms of, what you're seeing as other concerns too.
I think it was 6 months, James, since we were last here. So we were giving an update date at 6 months. So if you indicate to us how often you'd like an update or discussion.
I mean, I think at least that frequency, actually, sort of something post the winter or post the depths of winter would be a really good idea, wouldn't it? It seems to me. Do committee agree? Yep, lots of nods. Great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much for your time. Really excellent discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye. Bye. Goodbye.
Thanks. So item 12 on our agenda are the CQC reports, and we've got two, I think, as you were highlighting earlier, I think in the risk report that Bacon Road and Taverham CQC outcomes, unfortunately, are difficult. Shepherd, do you want to, I think this has got your initials against it, has it?
Yeah, that is correct. Thank you. So we have got Bacon and Taverham practices recently visited by CQC, and they run under one management in some ways. So I was tempted to take them in one, but I also do recognize that they have been rated differently under the CQC inspection. So if I start with Bacon Road, this is a relatively small practice. I think just over 4,000 patient list with them, and they have been rated as inadequate overall, and they've been rated as good as part of the safe element of their care, which is really brilliant. But as we see recently with CQC activities, there are domains that seems to feature as either requires improvement or inadequate, especially around the leadership aspect of it, and also the areas around the effectiveness of those services. So I think those are common themes that run across, I think, both practices, with some small differences. I think in one area where around effectiveness for Taverham, it requires improvement. But I think this is just for noting the activity that CQC has completed in the area, and there will be an in-depth kind of discussion in part 2 around this. So just to summarize, I think what I need to for the committee is for the committee to note the CQC reports for the two practice area and with the overall outcome of inadequate. For assurance purposes, I can confirm that we have an action plan that has been agreed, and we are working with all our key stakeholders, including CQC, to ensure that patient safety and the services continue to run very well. We've received confirmation from CQC this morning to say the progress that is being made is satisfactory and we are on track to turn around the practice. So I'll stop there for now with this.
Thanks, Shepherd. That's very clear. I suppose we as a committee are expressing our concern about those CQC outcomes, but noting that there are plans in place to make improvement. And as you say, under part 2, there's also a potential discussion there as well. Hilary.
Thanks, and thanks, Shepherd. We seem to hear at this committee about the ones that are a worry, obviously. How many practices have been inspected and how many are okay? Are there others that we don't hear about that are fine? That was my first question. The other question really was about prescribing, because it seems that CQC have got particular focus on medication reviews and prescribing and that particular aspect of primary care work. And I just wonder what support there is out there for practices to make sure that we don't have more following this this pathway, really.
Fantastic. So I'll start with the first one. So I think we do bring routinely all CQC activities, including those that have done well. And I think recently I think there are a few practices that actually did well, and we reported on that. And I think I should say that we are working quite closely with CQC. So we are aware of practices that are at risk, and we are working quite closely. So I do receive the CQC report positively because it does provide us with the opportunity to actually work closer with the practice and all the key stakeholders. And it's fair to say that what we are receiving, it's not really a surprise for us. And we've had conversations with CQC about our practice visit program that we are working to implement, which will proactively identify the areas that we need to improve so that we don't really get surprises through CQC. So in indirectly answering your questions, we are aware of the challenges that are sitting with practices. And I think in part 2, we've got a list of those that requires improvements that we do talk about, including some of them with workforce issues, estates issues element. Moving on to the part 2 of your question, which was around prescribing. I think we discussed this last month as well. I think we are noticing some changes in the way CQC are looking at medicines management in terms of a comparative approach to how antibiotics, pain management, and a number of other elements, long-term. So practices are being measured in that comparative nature. But I do receive that also in a positive way, that it is there to drive the quality of care and improvement for patients, and comparing sometimes is not a bad thing, but it's the only challenge we have. It does present significant pressures into our system and a lot of distress for the workforce who are already grappling with other competing challenges. So it's about how do we manage those pressures when they're created in our system.
Thanks, Shepherd. Sadie, have you got a process point that you wanted to come in on before I bring in? No, you haven't. Okay. On the first point, Shepherd, I think if I understood Hilary's question right, I may have got the wrong end of the stick though, because I'm not clinical, but I think of the 11 or 12 that are either RI or inadequate, there's obviously a higher number of 100 and something that are not, and therefore it would be good for the committee to know, as it were, in broad terms, roughly what the proportions are, so we can be reassured that it's a minority issue and that we're managing it compared with the bigger number. And I think in the second part of the meeting that we've got obviously the detail of the individual practices we're working with, but not necessarily that bigger context. Is that right, Hilary? Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, no, I was just trying to get it in some kind of, you know, how big a problem is it across our patch kind of thing, and how many practices are okay. I know that some haven't been inspected for quite some time, but the second part of the question really was more, can we, you know, if you get a CQC outcome which isn't good for a practice, that's really difficult and it's a lot of work. So are we moving things upstream, I suppose is the question, so that if we're aware of people that are at risk of kind of, you know, a negative CQC outcome, can we work with them beforehand, so we've basically got rid of the problems before they're an issue, I suppose is my question.
Yeah, thank you. Rosemary, should I bring you in and then you can take that question and respond to both, Shepherd? Rosemary.
Thanks, James, because there is a little bit of an overlap with what you just said, Hilary. You said that, Shepherd, that you're working closely with the CQC. Does that mean that on your radar are practices that have yet to have a full inspection, but you're aware that they may be going to have problems? Or are the CQC only letting you know when they've actually inspected and there are problems? I'm just thinking about those practices, you know, that are trugging along thinking they're okay, get the monthly CQC have looked at your data and we see no need to inspect at the moment. But would some of those be on your radar because of your relationship with the CQC, or do they hold those cards quite close to their chests?
I'm sure CQC would share what they are probably within their gift to share. I'm just mindful that Chris has also surfaced, and Chris may have a response because okay, I will stop there for Chris to come in.
Thanks, Shepherd. Yeah, so we've set up a monthly meeting that we have with the CQC, which colleagues from across the ICB attend, so the quality team, Shepherd's team, localities, etc. So we get together monthly, talk about, share the work that we're doing proactively to support primary care, but also they may come with some soft intelligence. But generally speaking, it's, you know, they're normally fairly, I say minor things, but things that we can go in and support with rather than CQC having to go in themselves, if that makes sense. So we do have really good dialogue and support as much as we can.
Thanks, Chris. That was what I was kind of meaning, being able to maybe help practices before, as you said, Hilary, they get the report and then it's all the work and the demoralisation of the workforce and all of that. Thank you.
Yeah, and the public confidence as well, I suppose.
Absolutely, James, absolutely.
Sadie.
I just wanted to add a couple of things, if I may. So on the training and upstream work, I think there has been quite a bit done by the internal teams around this, because obviously we see themes coming out of all of the inspections, and there have been recordings made of those sort of sessions, so they are available. Having said that, we've been talking a lot about resilience and capacity and what have you, and I think practices being able to find the space to focus on this work, and it is a lot of work, especially if practices have you know, been focusing on, quite rightly, other things during the pandemic, then some of the processes may have slipped, or they may be experiencing workforce issues. So I think that is our intention. It's so much better to get upstream of this, and of course, as much as it eats into practice capacity, it's also a really significant impact on the ICB teams themselves, because we've got several members of staff in several departments that are spending significant amount of time with practices, supporting them in that turnaround work. So so that was one thing. Hilary's question in the proportion of the ratings, I think we've got 105 practices. We've got I think 9 or 10 practices at the moment that are rated either inadequate or requires improvement. However, the majority of the practices rated good or outstanding haven't been inspected for a very long time, 2015, 2016, some of them, and we've got some that are more recent. And even the ones that were inspected pre-pandemic, we've seen a change in the inspection focus and the inspection regime. So I think the most recent inspections, if we look at those, I think there is a bit, you know, the practices are not coming out with the same ratings that they went in with on the whole. So that's definitely an area of focus for Shepherd's team and the other teams represented here today. It might be helpful for us to have a look at the overall standing. We did have a look at this under the CCG's Primary Care Committee. We've obviously got a new committee now. I'm very conscious you haven't seen that overall picture, and it's not difficult for us to do because we're just reporting information that we already have. So we'll bring to the next meeting that that overall picture of the 105 practices. It shows when they were last inspected and what their rating is now. So that's not difficult at all, and I think probably be very useful context for members.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you, Sadie. Yeah, lots of nods at that. Michael.
Just to say, we have been offering a bit of proactive training and heads up through our prescribing leads meetings. So a couple of meetings ago, we did a big section. Katie Woodcock from my team did a big section on common themes, etc. And one of my other members of my team, Hayley, did a section with the quality team, which is available as a recording, I think, on common CQC issues. But various members of my team are helping, as Shepherd alluded to turn around for practices who have missed some of the monitoring of higher risk drugs, etc.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Michael. That's really helpful. It'd be good to get the context and also broader understanding, I suppose, of the improvement methodologies that we've got in working with practices as well, or improving quality, as you say, upstream. Okay, anything else on this report? Otherwise, I think I'll move us on, if that's okay, back to the agenda. So that takes us to the finance report and to the prescribing report.
Okay, prescribing team report. I shall take the paper as read. This is my usual brief update on cost and quality indicators. So I'll just highlight a few things. On the second page, there's some interesting things going on with prescribing data. Our main database is called EPACT, run by the NHS BSA, and they haven't quite represented the new ICB structures. So prior to July, the ICBs were given the old CCG names, and now they're given the CCG codes, but the new ICB names. So it's a interesting halfway house. So you can see on that there are various representations of, for instance, Hertfordshire and West Essex, but they are actually sub ICBs. So I've had conversation with Hein, and we've agreed that we'll work around this and do an average of whilst NHS BSA haven't represented the new ICBs fully, we'll do an average of the new combined ICBs, sub-ICBs into an ICB, and we'll work on our position there. And I'll also next time look at deprivation indicators of the new ICBs, because generally spend per Astra PU goes with deprivation scores. So that would be interesting to see that in the new ICB structure, etc. So cost pressures, possibly table 2, you can see it's possible that the additional costs due to price concessions may have peaked, but that's far from certain yet. We haven't got a full month's worth of data on those, so you can see there's £3 million worth of cost pressures. When a shortage is declared, a price concession is applied, and the cost of the item goes up due to the shortage, etc. So that is a big prevailing wind against our as a cost pressure. to us. Dependence forming medicine, so these are our key quality indicators along with antibiotics. High dose opiates we continue to improve on. We're launching our toolkit for opioid deprescribing next week with the help of formerly UEA, but now University of Leicester Professor Bhattacharya, etc. So we have sent out invites for that, so we're doing okay on that. Gabapentinoids, we continue to be out of the top quartile, so that's possible we could retire that one from our risk register at some point in the near future. Hypnotics and anxiolytics, we have downgraded that one because last month we dropped to 4th. There's a slight typo there. It says reverted to 4th. It's reverted to 3rd, I'm afraid. It's just by a very small margin, whilst decreasing compared to a national average. We dropped back to 3rd, so but I'm fairly confident we'll move back further down the pack on that indicator. Antibiotics, still some work going on. It's National World Antibiotic Awareness Week in the next couple of weeks, and there's a big meeting in Cambridge around that. Some movements in scores in terms of percentage of broad spectrum antibiotics, etc. And this is one of the indicators that CQC look at and sometimes comment on, not always comment on, but it is something that practices will be encouraged to have an action plan for, so that when CQC visits, they can demonstrate that they are moving towards the right direction, or have audited the reasons why they are perceived as an outlier in these data, which is publicly available. Happy to take any questions, comments.
Thank you very much, Michael. Fascinating. I find all that actually to the non-medical person, really. Make it cheaper and less opiates and less sort of sleeping drugs. I know that's not the right phrase, but yeah. Any comments or questions, colleagues? You all know much more about this than I do, so there ought to be some interest or commentary, I guess. Or perhaps I am the most interested in the drugs and how it all works in primary care.
No, I think it's me, but anyway, yeah.
I think it probably is you.
Yes.
You're the professional, absolutely. Sadie.
Thank you. Just thinking about the antibiotics targets, for want of a better word, it's really helpful to sort of see the breakdown of our different localities and our different PCNs. Oh, sorry. Oh no, it's all right. I've got a window cleaner behind me and the dog's about to bark. Sorry. I will just shut my curtain. I was just wondering kind of how we manage versus other systems, other regions, and whether we're, other people are experiencing the same sort of issues as we are, or what?
The simple answer is yes. Antibiotic volume did go up to an extent during the peak of COVID, etc. And I can bring perhaps next month some regional charts so you can actually see that for yourselves. I haven't got it in front of me at the moment, but we're not alone in seeing increases in certainly volume and percentage of broad spectrum antibiotics. So I'll bring that along next time. That is an interesting point. Regional benchmarking is quite informative. Okay.
And in my head, Michael, I have a sort of map of Norfolk and Waveney where the issues are worse in some areas. In my head, I have the West as having particular issues around some prescribing issues, and so it would be useful to build a bit of a map, wouldn't it? Or would it?
Well, I mean, there are some known issues certainly in terms of spend, etc. We could break down the cost per Astro PU, which, as I say, doesn't represent deprivation scores, but I can put deprivation scores against that for the old 5 CCG footprints and maybe PCNs if you're interested. But certainly West does feature higher on spend. This is true. Norwich is probably one of the lowest ones now, and South is doing fine. But there you can see in terms of antibiotic volume, there's quite and percentage of broad spectrum, there's quite a variation.
Yeah.
due to historic prescribing patterns.
I'm just wondering what tools we give the rest of the ICB or the ICP, in fact, some of the partnerships in the places, you know, materials to think about how they can take action locally that is about generally improving outcomes, but also having an eye to the prescribing costs and all that sort of thing, really. Hilary.
Yeah, I mean, I think once people are on some of the thinking about things like the opiates, once people are on them, it's really hard to get them off. Antibiotics, it's a little bit simpler, I think, to make different choices, but we do have a whole cohort of people who've been on opiates and things like that for quite a long time, and then it takes a huge amount of work to try and make an impact on that. I suppose the feedback I get from colleagues is we don't want to prescribe them, but we need another option, and we're told very much what we shouldn't do. But when people have got pain that isn't resolving and you need a solution and they're continually asking for a solution, quite understandably, it's what do you do positively? And I think that's the real challenge. I think GPs are really struggling with we know what not to, but there isn't an alternative for us to go to.
Yes, almost every alternative will be harder and longer, won't it? I suspect than that. Yeah, but it's probably a discussion we want the rest of the system to have, isn't it? As a primary care commissioning committee, I would have thought. Michael.
Yeah, sort of come back on that. So we're launching the opioid toolkit next week, and there are some things we're putting in place which will help with that. The new NICE guidance has been updated, and we're funding an e-learning package around the new NICE guidance, which is in plain English. And the osteoarthritis guidance, I think, changed a couple of weeks ago, so that's had to be re-recorded. But we'll be launching that as a training tool for, you know, more one-to-one training with clinicians, but we'll also be doing some workshops in the new year, and we're trying to organise some group sessions for physio for your chronic pain patients, which is something that NICE recommend. We're also going to be funding a form of CBT. We hope there's a regional business case going in, which will have a lot of ACT element, which you'll have to remind me what that stands for, because I always forget, Hilary. But it was based on 10-minute CBT, but we've been talking to the suppliers, and they're going to do a bespoke 10-minute CBT 2-hour session, which you can dip in and dip out of in the new year. I know that's probably difficult to do in a 10-minute consultation, but it gives you some of the tools that you need to help.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Okay, if that's all on that item, thank you very much, Michael, for that. So I'm conscious of time now. I've not managed time very well. Apologise. Item 14 then is our finance report, and is that James? Did I recall?
That's right. Yep, that's
right. Over to you, James.
Thank you. So as usual, I'll take the report as read, but highlight the key points in the report to you. So beginning with the executive summary page, this report's produced in arrears due to the timing of the CCG and how ICB month ends. So it is reporting the third month of the ICB accounts, month 6 of the financial year, and a forecast of 9 months for the ICB. You can see from this summary that the position on month 6 for primary care and prescribing budgets are £2.8 million favourable to budget for the ICB, which represents Q2 to Q4 of this financial year. The position includes an efficiency target of just over £7.3 million built into that budget. This forms part of the 4-year efficiency requirement of £8.4 million, and as we can see, these efficiencies are not phased in a linear fashion and do build up over the year. Through continued monitoring of efficiency projects, we are at month 6 still forecasting them to deliver on plan. There are risks around the delivery of savings, particularly for the Doxaban project, as this is reliant on external rebates for its delivery, which again we continue to monitor. Moving on to the financial summary, this shows that GP prescribing is 0.2 adverse to plan as at month 6, with the figures being 2 months in arrears. This is showing the April to July estimates cumulatively were marginally undervalued. In addition, efficiency savings have materialised in the period, allowing the forecast to be delivered and in some schemes over-delivered. These efficiency expectations are already baked into the budget. So of the £7.3 million requirement for the 9 months, we've received 4 months of actual achievement, and this to date has over-delivered. However, the budget phasing these efficiencies does increase rapidly from this point onwards, and the delivery will need to match that. There are also prior year benefits within the GP prescribing area. There are also positive variances within delegated primary care, which have crystallised worth £0.9 million year to date, which I'll cover later. Moving on to the detailed financial analysis, this shows the key drivers around the prescribing spend being on plan. However, there's still some key areas of risk around continuous glucose monitoring and SGLT2. There's a high degree of uncertainty over the financial implications of these factors. We receive additional EPACT figures for CGM, SGLT2 and DOACs, and so that we can see the year-on-year increases and continue to monitor these risky areas. Moving on to the System Development Fund, this key area of investment is showing on plan, and it's closely scrutinised both locally and nationally through the financial returns to NHS England. Moving into the delegated co-commissioning area, the underspend here is predominantly due to the way in which PMS GMS budgets are ring-fenced to delegated primary care and prior credits also from 21-22 feeding into this cost centre. And then finally, moving on to the detail on GP and other prescribing, this slide shows the detailed variances with prescribing leading to the overall 9-month favourable forecast. However, it still needs to be reported that there is a large degree of uncertainty and risk within prescribing. The finance and meds management teams work closely together to monitor the EPACT data for the key areas of risk, particularly around DOACs, continuous glucose monitoring and SGLT2. We can see from the year-on-year comparison that these areas are growing considerably more than the growth that's built into our budgets. So to give some flavour for that, DOACs are growing at just under 9%, Freestyle Libre somewhere near 45%, and SGLT2 33%. And just as a comparison, we would have somewhere around 5% growth built into our budget. So these areas are putting pressure on our forecast, and we are highlighting them as a key risk, not yet materialised. But there is a high degree of pressure coming from. There is also a high degree of pressure coming from NCSO, which Michael alluded to earlier in his report. Where these items have been seeing some high increases in prices, which will begin to materialise in month 7 onwards. So that was all I was going to highlight. Are there any questions?
Thank you, James. Just about kept up with that. Hein?
Thanks, James. I had a specific question around QOF, which is on page 78. The actuals are equal to budget, the forecast is equal to budget. So my assumption is we don't know better than that. So my question is, when in the financial year will we get a reasonable estimate on what QOF will deliver?
Very near the end of the year, unfortunately, is the way it works. So it is split into several areas, but we often don't get a more reasonable expectation towards the end of the year. So we would forecast it on plan until we know better, essentially. So
okay. And related question to Sadie, we pick it then up early in the new financial year on seeing the outcomes of the scheme of QOF.
Sorry, you'd like to see QOF?
Well, I know in the past we've had a review of how the past year's QOF schemes panned out, but I don't want to lose it somewhere in the forward planner, I guess is what I'm saying.
We usually get the full and final outturn around, I think payments are around the end of June, aren't they, James, to practices? So about 3 months after year end. So we can certainly look to bring a report to the committee at that point. And I think, really this will be very telling in terms of our previous conversations about resilience and capacity within general practice, as to how QOF is going to perform this year.
Yep, thanks.
Okay, we'll add that then. Thank you, Sadie. Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, we note this report, James, and forecast. Thank you very much. Okay, is there any other business? Are there any questions from the public, Sadie, or any members of the public present? I don't think there are there?
I would just defer to Sarah whether she's received any. Don't think we have.
No, nothing received.
Okay, great. All right. Is there any other business from anybody then? Okay, then we'll close the part one of the meeting. Do we have a separate link, Sarah, for part two? I'm not sure I had that actually, if I'm honest with you, but let's come out of here then. Shall we take a 5-minute comfort break and come back?
I'll send it across to James.
Great, thank you. All right, let's take 5 then and come back in 5 minutes. So that's 3:20. Thank you.